The crack of a gunshot echoed across the vast Arizona landscape, shattering the peaceful dawn silence that had settled over Sierra Vista just as the sun began to peek over the distant mountains. Natalie Pierce clutched her side, warm blood seeping between her trembling fingers as she stumbled forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't stop now, not when freedom was finally within her grasp. It was the summer of 1879, and Sierra Vista was still little more than a dusty outpost at the edge of civilization, a place where the law often took a back seat to personal justice and greed. Natalie had been running for what felt like hours, though in reality it had likely only been minutes since she'd escaped from the Caldwell ranch. Behind her, she could hear the angry shouts of men and the thundering of hooves as they pursued her across the rugged terrain. The bullet had caught her just as she'd scrambled over the fence, a searing pain that had nearly brought her to her knees. But desperation had kept her moving, pushing her forward even as she felt her strength ebbing with each passing moment. She needed to reach town, to find help before Augustus Caldwell and his men caught up with her. Ahead, through vision that was beginning to blur, Natalie spotted a lone rider approaching from the direction of town. Hope flared briefly in her chest, only to be tempered by caution. This stranger could just as easily be one of Caldwell's associates as a potential savior. Zachary had been riding since first light, returning to Sierra Vista after delivering a herd of cattle to a neighboring ranch. The 26-year-old cowboy was bone-tired, looking forward to nothing more than a hot meal and his bed at the boarding house. The rising sun cast long shadows across the desert scrub, highlighting the contours of the rugged landscape that he'd come to call home over the past 5 years. He spotted the woman from a distance, noting the awkward, staggering gait that spoke of injury. When he heard gunshots behind her, his instincts kicked in. Spurring his horse forward, Jackson closed the distance quickly, taking in the blood staining her dress and the terror in her eyes as he approached. "Please," Natalie gasped as the cowboy reined his horse to a stop beside her. "They're coming! Help me!" Before she could say more, her legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed onto the dusty ground. Jackson was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her to assess the damage. The bullet wound on her side was bleeding steadily, and her face had gone frighteningly pale beneath a layer of trail dust. "You're going to be all right, miss," he said, though he wasn't at all certain it was true. "I'm going to get you to the doctor." In the distance, Jackson could make out a group of riders cresting a hill, moving fast in their direction. Whoever this woman was running from, they were determined to catch her. With gentle but urgent movements, Jackson lifted the wounded woman onto his horse, wincing at her cry of pain as the motion jarred her injury. Mounting behind her, he secured her against his chest with one arm and turned his horse toward town, digging his heels in hard to urge the animal to its fastest pace. "Hold on," he urged as the woman's head lolled against his shoulder. "Just hold on." Natalie was drifting in and out of consciousness, the pain in her side like fire with every jolt of the horse's stride. Through the haze of her suffering, she was aware of strong arms holding her steady, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, and the rough voice of the stranger urging both her and his mount to keep going. "My name's Jackson," the cowboy told her, trying to keep her conscious. "Jackson Zachary." "What's yours?" "Natalie," she managed through clenched teeth. "Natalie Pierce." "Well, Miss Pierce, I'm getting you to Doc Wilson as fast as this horse can carry us. You just keep fighting, you hear." The sound of pursuit was growing closer. Jackson didn't dare look back, focusing all his attention on the road ahead and the increasingly limp form of the woman in his arms. Sierra Vista was just coming into view, its buildings shimmering in the morning heat. "Why are they after you?" Jackson asked, hoping to keep her talking and alert. Natalie's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Caldwell, I was his. Prisoner found out. His plans, silver mine. Illegal claim." Jackson's jaw tightened. Augustus Caldwell was one of the most powerful men in the territory, a cattle baron with political connections and a reputation for ruthlessness. If this woman had evidence of wrongdoing on Caldwell's part, her life wasn't worth a Confederate dollar. They thundered down the main street of Sierra Vista, sending a group of early morning pedestrians scrambling for safety. Jackson headed straight for the doctor's office, a modest wooden structure at the quieter end of town. "Doc Wilson," he shouted as they approached. "Doc, emergency." By the time they reached the doctor's porch, Natalie had lost consciousness entirely. Jackson dismounted in a fluid motion, lifting her from the saddle and carrying her up the steps, just as the door swung open to reveal a disheveled man in his 50s, hastily tucking his shirt into his trousers. "Good Lord, what happened?" Dr. Wilson demanded, stepping aside to let Jackson carry Natalie into the examination room. "Gunshot wound," Jackson explained, laying her carefully on the table. "She's been bleeding for at least 20 minutes, maybe longer." The doctor was already moving, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of Natalie's dress to expose the wound. "Who is she? What happened?" Before Jackson could answer, the sound of approaching horses filled the air. Through the window, he could see Augustus Caldwell and 4 of his men pulling up outside. "That's the problem," Jackson muttered, reaching for the rifle the doctor kept beside the door. "And it looks like it just rode into town." Caldwell's voice boomed from outside. "Zachary, I know you've got her in there. Send her out and there won't be any trouble." Dr. Wilson looked up from his patient, his hands already bloody from his initial examination. "What in God's name have you brought to my door, Jackson?" "A woman who needs your help, Doc," Jackson replied, checking that the rifle was loaded. "And I aim to make sure you have the chance to give it to her." Outside, Caldwell and his men had dismounted and spread out, covering the front of the building. Jackson could see them through the window, weapons at the ready. "She's stolen something of mine, Zachary," Caldwell called. "A valuable document. I just want what's mine. Hand her over." "She's been shot, Caldwell," Jackson called back. "She needs medical attention." "She needs to face justice for theft. That's my property she's carrying." Jackson turned to the doctor, who was working feverishly to extract the bullet. "How is she?" Dr. Wilson's expression was grim. "The bullet's lodged deep. She's lost a lot of blood." "I can't promise anything, but I'm doing what I can." Jackson nodded, turning his attention back to the standoff outside. He knew Caldwell's reputation. The man wouldn't hesitate to burn down the doctor's office with all of them inside if he thought it would protect his interests. "I'm going out there," Jackson decided. "Keep working on her, Doc. Be careful," Dr. Wilson cautioned without looking up. "Augustus Caldwell didn't get where he is by playing fair." Jackson stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed directly at Caldwell or his men, not yet. "She's being treated for a gunshot wound," he announced. "The doctor's working to save her life right now." Augustus Caldwell was a large man in his 40s with a thick mustache and cold eyes. He stepped forward, keeping a careful distance. "That woman is a thief, Zachary. She worked in my house and took advantage of my hospitality to steal from me. I want her returned to face justice." "Seems to me she's already faced your kind of justice," Jackson replied evenly, nodding toward the bloodstains on his own shirt. "Being shot in the back while running away doesn't exactly sound like a fair trial." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd that had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Sierra Vista might be a rough town, but shooting an unarmed woman didn't sit right with most folks. Caldwell's face darkened. What happens on my property is my business. That woman has documents that legally belong to me. I want them returned immediately. She's unconscious, Caldwell. Even if she has your papers, she can't exactly hand them over right now. The standoff continued, tension thickening the air. Inside, Dr. Wilson worked frantically to save Natalie's life, extracting the bullet and stemming the bleeding. Jackson kept his position on the porch, knowing that to back down now would mean signing Natalie's death warrant if she survived the surgery. Sheriff Thomas Reeves arrived, drawn by reports of armed men facing off in front of the doctor's office. A tall man with a graying beard and a no-nonsense demeanor, Reeves had maintained an uneasy peace in Sierra Vista for the past decade. "What's going on here, gentlemen?" he demanded, stepping between Jackson and Caldwell. "Sheriff, that man is harboring a thief," Caldwell said immediately. "A woman who stole valuable property from my home. I demand you arrest her and return my property." Sheriff Reeves looked from Caldwell to Jackson. "That true, Zachary?" Jackson kept his rifle steady. "All I know is I found this woman shot and bleeding out on the road to town, with Caldwell and his men in pursuit. She's in there fighting for her life right now because someone put a bullet in her back while she was running away. Doesn't sound like justice to me, Sheriff." The sheriff frowned, clearly weighing his options. Caldwell was an influential man, but public shooting of unarmed women wasn't something he could overlook, regardless of the alleged crime. "Here's what's going to happen," Sheriff Reeves announced after a moment. "Everyone's going to lower their weapons. Mr. Caldwell, you and your men can wait at my office while I sort this out. Mr. Zachary, you're going to tell me exactly what happened, and when that woman is conscious, if she regains consciousness, I'll hear her side of the story." Caldwell's face flushed with anger. "Sheriff, I demand." "You're not in a position to demand anything right now," Reeves interrupted. "Unless you want to explain to a judge why your response to an alleged theft was to shoot an unarmed woman in the back. Even in this territory, that's not how the law works." For a tense moment, it seemed Caldwell might defy the sheriff, but finally, with a curt nod to his men, he backed down. "I'll be at your office, Sheriff, but this isn't over." As Caldwell and his men departed, Sheriff Reeves turned to Jackson. "Now, let's hear the full story, son." Inside the doctor's office, they found Dr. Wilson washing blood from his hands, his expression weary but satisfied. "The bullet's out," he reported. "Missed her vital organs by the grace of God. She's lost a lot of blood, but if infection doesn't set in, she's got a fighting chance." Relief washed over Jackson, surprising him with its intensity. He hadn't realized how invested he'd become in the survival of this stranger in such a short time. "She said something about Caldwell having an illegal claim on a silver mine," Jackson told the sheriff. "Said she was his prisoner, not his employee." Sheriff Reeves's expression darkened. "That's a serious accusation. Did she have any proof?" Before Jackson could answer, a weak voice came from the examination table. "In my boot," Natalie whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "Left boot. Papers." Dr. Wilson retrieved the boot in question, and sure enough, folded tightly and tucked into the lining was a set of documents. Sheriff Reeves examined them with a frown that deepened as he read. "These appear to be fraudulent land claims," he said finally. "If these are authentic, Caldwell has been filing false documents to claim mineral rights on land that legally belongs to the Morales family." "They're real," Natalie confirmed weakly. "I copied them from his safe. He's been bribing officials, forging signatures. The Morales family doesn't know. Their land sits on one of the richest silver deposits in the territory." Jackson moved to Natalie's side, instinctively taking her hand. You worked for Caldwell, she nodded slightly, wincing at the pain the movement caused. Housekeeper. 6 months. When I found out what he was doing, tried to leave, he locked me up, said I knew too much. How long were you held prisoner? Sheriff Reeves asked, his expression grim. 2 weeks, Natalie whispered. Escaped this morning. Took the papers as proof. Sheriff Reeves tucked the documents into his vest. These will need to be verified, but if they're what you say they are, Augustus Caldwell is facing serious charges. I'll need a formal statement from you when you're stronger, Miss Pierce. She needs rest now, Dr. Wilson interjected firmly. She's not out of danger yet. As the sheriff departed to deal with Caldwell, Jackson remained by Natalie's side. You're safe now, he assured her. I'll make sure of it. Her fingers tightened weakly around his. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. Jackson considered the question, then answered simply, because it's right, and because anyone brave enough to stand up to Augustus Caldwell deserves a fighting chance. A ghost of a smile touched Natalie's pale lips before her eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Dr. Wilson placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder. She needs to rest, son. You've done your part in getting her here alive. Why don't you go clean up and get some food? She'll be here when you get back. Jackson nodded, reluctantly releasing Natalie's hand. I'll check on her later, Doc, and I'll be nearby if Caldwell tries anything. As Jackson stepped outside, he was surprised to find himself deeply concerned for the welfare of a woman he'd known for less than an hour. There was something about Natalie Pierce, her courage, her determination, the way she'd fought to expose a wrong despite the risk to herself that resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. With a last glance at the doctor's office, Jackson headed to the boarding house to clean up, knowing instinctively that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Sheriff Reeves had placed Augustus Caldwell under arrest after verifying the documents Natalie had provided. The Morales family, longtime ranchers in the area, were shocked to learn of the silver beneath their land and grateful for Natalie's intervention that had prevented them from being swindled. Throughout it all, Jackson found himself returning to the doctor's office whenever he could, sitting beside Natalie's bed as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Dr. Wilson had cautioned that infection remained a risk, and indeed, by the second night, Natalie had developed a dangerous fever. Jackson had been there through the worst of it, helping the doctor apply cool compresses and coaxing sips of water between her parched lips when she was lucid enough to swallow. He held her hand through the delirious ramblings brought on by the fever, learning fragments of her past through broken sentences and orphaned childhood in Denver, a journey south in search of work, dreams of saving enough to buy a small place of her own someday. On the morning of the 4th day, Jackson entered the doctor's office to find Natalie awake and alert, propped up against pillows. The fever had broken during the night, and though she was still weak, there was color in her cheeks again and clarity in her green eyes. "Mr. Zachary," she greeted him with a small smile. "Dr. Wilson says you've been here almost constantly. I don't know how to thank you." Jackson removed his hat, suddenly self-conscious. "No need for thanks, Miss Pierce. I'm just glad to see you on the mend." "Natalie, please," she corrected him. "I think we're well past formalities after you've seen me through fever dreams and who knows what else." "Natalie," he agreed with a smile. "Then I'm Jackson." Dr. Wilson entered from the back room, looking pleased at his patient's improvement. "Miss Pierce is making a remarkable recovery," he announced. "Strong constitution, this one. Still, she'll need at least another week of rest before she should even think about traveling." "Traveling," Jackson echoed, surprised by the pang of dismay the word triggered. "You're planning to leave Sierra Vista?" Natalie looked down at her hands. "I don't have any reason to stay. Once I'm well enough, I'll need to find work somewhere, preferably far from Augustus Caldwell and his influence. Caldwell won't be a problem anymore, Jackson assured her. Sheriff Reeves has him locked up awaiting a federal marshal. The evidence you provided was more than enough. Even so, Natalie said softly, I have no place here. No job, no home. Before Jackson could respond, there was a knock at the door. Doctor. Wilson answered it to reveal Elena Morales, the daughter of the family whose land Natalie had saved. The young woman carried a basket covered with a cloth and a bouquet of wildflowers. I heard Miss Pierce was awake, Elena said. Mama sent food, and I brought flowers to thank her for what she did for our family. Natalie looked overwhelmed as Elena placed the flowers beside her bed and set the basket on a nearby table. The rich aroma of homemade tortillas and spiced meat filled the small room. Your family owes me nothing, Natalie protested. Anyone would have done the same. No, Elena said firmly. Not anyone would risk their life against a man like Augustus Caldwell. What you did was brave, and my family is in your debt. After Elena had gone, promising that her family would provide more meals during Natalie's recovery, Jackson found himself alone with Natalie again. The doctor had stepped out to see another patient, leaving them in a comfortable silence broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. The Morales family is well respected around here, Jackson said finally. Their gratitude could open doors for you in Sierra Vista if you wanted to stay. Natalie looked at him thoughtfully. Why are you still here, Jackson? You saved my life, brought me to the doctor. Your duty was done days ago. It was a fair question, one Jackson had been asking himself with increasing frequency. Why had he spent every available moment at the bedside of a woman who had been a stranger less than a week ago? Why did the thought of her leaving town cause an ache in his chest? I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. I just know I'm not ready to walk away yet. Something flickered in Natalie's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or understanding. Whatever it was, it softened her expression. Then I suppose I'm not ready to leave yet either, she said quietly. At least, not until I understand why a cowboy I've barely met would sit beside me through fever and delirium. Jackson smiled, relief washing through him. That seems reasonable. As the days passed, Natalie grew stronger under Dr. Wilson's care and the generosity of the townsfolk who, having heard the story of her bravery against Caldwell, brought food and offers of assistance. Jackson visited daily, often bringing books or newspapers to help pass the time during her convalescence. They talked for hours, learning each other's stories. Jackson told her of his childhood in Texas, his years working cattle drives, and how he'd ended up in Sierra Vista 5 years earlier, working for various ranches and saving to buy land of his own someday. Natalie shared more of her past, the loss of her parents to influenza when she was 16, the years of moving from town to town, taking whatever work she could find. I've never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots, she confessed one afternoon, a week into her recovery. Always moving, always looking for something better. And have you found it? Jackson asked. The something better. Natalie's gaze met his, steady and searching. I'm beginning to think I might have. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Jackson found himself leaning slightly forward, drawn by a force he couldn't name. Before the moment could develop further, Dr. Wilson bustled in with fresh bandages, breaking the spell. Good news, Miss Pierce, the doctor announced cheerfully. I believe you're well enough to leave my care tomorrow, provided you continue to rest and avoid strenuous activity for another week or two. Reality crashed back. Natalie would need somewhere to stay, somewhere to work. As if reading his thoughts, she bit her lip uncertainly. That's wonderful news, Doctor. but I'm afraid I haven't arranged lodgings yet." "Actually," Jackson said, an idea forming, "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house mentioned she could use help with cooking and cleaning in exchange for room and board. It wouldn't be strenuous work, just enough to earn your keep while you continue healing." Natalie's face brightened. "That sounds perfect. Would you mind introducing me?" "It would be my pleasure," Jackson replied, relieved that he'd found a reason for her to stay in Sierra Vista and in his life a little longer. The next day, Jackson escorted Natalie from the doctor's office to the boarding house where he himself had a room. Mrs. Henderson, a kindly widow in her 60s who ran the establishment with brisk efficiency, welcomed Natalie warmly after hearing her story. "Any young woman brave enough to stand up to Augustus Caldwell is welcome under my roof," she declared. "The work isn't difficult, helping with meals and keeping the common areas tidy. Your room will be small, but it's clean and private." "It sounds wonderful," Natalie said sincerely. "I can't thank you enough." "Thank me by getting your strength back," Mrs. Henderson replied. "And perhaps by teaching me that Denver-style apple pie recipe you mentioned. Now, let me show you to your room." As Natalie settled into her new accommodation, a modest but comfortable room at the back of the house, Jackson found himself oddly content knowing she would be under the same roof, just down the hall from his own quarters. Mrs. Henderson had strict rules about propriety, of course, but meals would be shared in the common dining room, and there would be ample opportunity for conversation. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Natalie gradually took on more responsibilities in the boarding house, winning Mrs. Henderson's approval with her hard work and cooking skills. Jackson continued his work at the nearby Walsh Ranch, returning each evening to find Natalie waiting with a warm smile that made his heart beat faster each time. They often sat together on the boarding house porch after dinner, watching the sunset and talking long into the evening. Sometimes other boarders joined them, but increasingly they found moments to be alone, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. "Have you ever been in love, Jackson?" Natalie asked one evening as they watched stars emerge in the darkening sky. The question caught him off guard. "Once," he admitted after a moment. "Or at least I thought I was. Back in Texas before I started working cattle drives. Her name was Sarah. We talked about getting married, but then her family moved east and she chose to go with them rather than stay with me." "I'm sorry," Natalie said softly. Jackson shook his head. "Don't be. It hurt at the time, but looking back, I'm not sure it was really love, not the kind that lasts anyway." "What about you?" Natalie was silent for a long moment. "No," she finally answered. "I've never stayed in one place long enough to fall in love. Always moving, always careful not to get too attached." "And now?" Jackson asked, his voice low. Her eyes met his in the gathering darkness. "Now I'm not so sure that was the right approach." The air between them crackled with unspoken feelings, with possibilities that neither had yet dared to voice aloud. Jackson found himself leaning toward her, drawn by an invisible force. "Natalie, there you two are," Mrs. Henderson's voice broke the moment as she stepped onto the porch. "I've made fresh lemonade. Would either of you care for a glass?" The opportunity passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement that whatever was growing between them was mutual, even if neither was quite ready to name it. As summer gave way to fall, Natalie became a fixture in Sierra Vista. The Morales family, now developing their silver mine with legitimate partners, offered her a position managing the household of their expanding ranch. But she chose to stay at the boarding house, where her baking had become locally famous, and Mrs. Henderson had come to rely on her assistance. For Jackson, watching Natalie bloom in the community brought a joy he hadn't expected. She was no longer the wounded, desperate woman he'd rescued on the road. She was confident, respected, and increasingly essential to his own happiness. On a crisp October evening, Jackson returned from a 3-day cattle drive to find Natalie waiting for him on the boarding house porch, a warm shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "Welcome back," she greeted him with a smile that warmed him more thoroughly than any fire could have. "Mrs. Henderson saved you some supper." "I missed you," Jackson said simply, the words escaping before he could consider them. Natalie's smile softened. "I missed you too." That night, after he'd eaten and cleaned up from the trail, they sat together by the fireplace in the otherwise empty common room, the other boarders having retired for the evening. "I've been thinking," Jackson said, watching the firelight play across Natalie's features. "I've saved enough for a down payment on a small ranch. There's a property about 5 miles west of town, nothing fancy, just a cabin and enough land for a decent herd to start with." "That's wonderful, Jackson," Natalie said sincerely. "You're making your dream come true." He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "The thing is, I've realized that dream has changed. The land, the cattle, they're still important, but they're not enough anymore. Not without someone to share it with." Natalie went very still, her eyes fixed on his face. "These past few months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and courage," Jackson continued, his voice low and earnest, "I've come to care for you, Natalie, more than I thought possible." "Jackson," she whispered, her voice catching. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he hurried to add. "I know this might seem sudden, but I wanted you to know that when I think about that cabin, that land, I see you there. If you need time—" "Yes," Natalie interrupted, her eyes shining. Jackson blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "Yes, you need time." A smile bloomed across her face, radiant in the firelight. "Yes, I see myself there too, with you." For a moment, Jackson couldn't speak, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion. Then he reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I love you, Natalie Pierce," he said, the words feeling right, feeling true in a way he'd never experienced before. "I think I started falling for you that first day on the road, though I didn't know it then." "I love you too," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You saved more than my life that day, Jackson. You gave me a reason to stop running, a place to belong." He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed her gently, reverently, as if sealing a promise. When they parted, the look they shared contained all the hope and possibilities of their future together. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Sierra Vista, met with universal approval. The Morales family insisted on hosting the wedding at their ranch as a token of their gratitude to Natalie. Mrs. Henderson fussed over wedding preparations like a mother hen, while Dr. Wilson proudly agreed to give the bride away in the absence of her own family. On a perfect November afternoon, with the desert landscape painted in the gold and crimson of autumn, Natalie Pierce became Natalie Zachary in a ceremony attended by what seemed like the entire town. She wore a simple white dress with lace trim, a gift from Alina Morales, and carried wildflowers gathered from the land that would soon be their home. Jackson, standing tall in his best suit, felt his heart might burst with joy as he watched Natalie walk toward him, her face glowing with happiness and love. The wounded woman he'd rescued on a dusty road had become the center of his world, his partner in all things. "I, Jackson, take you, Natalie," he vowed, his voice steady and sure, "to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." As Natalie repeated the vows, her voice clear and strong, Jackson marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment, a chance encounter, a desperate rescue, and the slow, beautiful unfolding of love that neither had been looking for but both had found. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. The Morales family presented them with a silver serving set crafted from the first silver extracted from their mine. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears, and even Sheriff Reeves unbent enough to offer a toast to the couple who had, in their own way, helped bring justice to Sierra Vista. As the sun set behind the mountains, Jackson took Natalie's hand and led her away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. "Happy, Mrs. Zachary?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against his chest, sighing contentedly. "Happier than I ever thought possible. It's strange to think that if I hadn't been shot that day." "Don't," he interrupted gently. "I can't bear to think about that. Let's just be grateful that I was on that road at that moment." "Divine providence," Natalie said softly. "That's what Mrs. Henderson calls it, and I think she's right." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one above the darkening landscape, the celebration continuing in the distance. "Ready to go home?" Jackson asked eventually. Home. Such a simple word, but one that carried profound meaning for both of them. The small but sturdy cabin Jackson had spent the past month preparing, the land that would sustain them, the life they would build together. "Yes," Natalie answered, turning in his arms to face him. "I'm ready to go home." Their life together began in earnest the next day. The cabin was modest, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but Jackson had worked hard to make it comfortable, adding touches like curtains purchased from the general store and a rocking chair on the porch where they could watch the sunset. The land stretched out around them, 30 acres of promise. Jackson had already acquired a small herd of cattle and 2 horses, the beginnings of what he hoped would someday be a prosperous ranch. Natalie brought her own skills: gardening, cooking, the practical knowledge of household management that would make their homestead thrive. Winter came early that year, bringing snow to the high desert by late November. The newlyweds found joy in the simple rhythm of their days: Jackson tending the livestock, Natalie keeping their home, both learning the delicate dance of partnership that marriage required. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from the small collection of books they'd accumulated, sometimes simply talking, planning, dreaming of the future they would create together. "I want children," Natalie confessed one snowy night as they lay in bed, the warmth of their bodies a contrast to the winter chill outside. "A family. Something I haven't had since I was 16. Jackson pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I want that too. A whole brood of little Zacharys running around this place someday." They made love with tender passion that night, the first conscious attempt to create the family they both desired. Whether it took root then or in the weeks that followed, neither could say for certain, but by spring, Natalie's suspicions were confirmed by Dr. Wilson. Their family would expand before the year was out. Jackson's reaction to the news was everything Natalie could have hoped for. He whooped with joy, lifting her off her feet in a careful embrace before setting her down as if she might break. "A baby," he said, wonder filling his voice. "Our baby." The months that followed were busy ones. Jackson worked from dawn to dusk, adding a room to their cabin, increasing his herd, determined to provide well for his growing family. Natalie's body changed, her belly swelling with new life, her face glowing with an inner radiance that made Jackson fall in love with her all over again each day. Their first child, a son they named Thomas James Zachary, arrived on a clear October day almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. He was a healthy, robust boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's determined chin. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered, holding his son for the first time, overwhelmed by a love so intense it brought tears to his eyes. Natalie, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband and son with deep contentment. He is, and he's just the beginning. Life settled into a new pattern with Thomas's arrival. Days became centered around the baby's needs. Nights were often interrupted by his cries, but neither Jackson nor Natalie would have changed a moment of it. They watched with wonder as their son grew, marking each milestone with celebration: his first smile, first word, first steps. The ranch prospered along with their family. Jackson's careful management and hard work paid dividends, allowing them to hire help as their herd expanded. Natalie's vegetable garden grew, providing not only for their table but enough excess to sell in town. When Thomas was 2, Natalie gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Elena Zachary, honoring both Natalie's mother and the Morales family, who had become such dear friends. 2 children under 3. Natalie laughed one evening as she nursed Elizabeth while Jackson entertained Thomas with a wooden horse he'd carved. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that this would be my life, I'd never have believed them." Jackson looked up, his expression softening as he took in the scene: his wife, his children, the home they'd built together. "Sometimes I still can't believe it myself. That day on the road, all I was thinking about was getting you to the doctor before you died. I had no idea I was also heading toward the rest of my life." As the years passed, their family and ranch continued to flourish. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy with a natural affinity for horses, while Elizabeth proved to be as strong-willed and determined as both her parents. 2 more children joined the family: another son, Michael, and a second daughter, Grace, completing the brood of little Zacharys that Jackson had once envisioned. Sierra Vista grew from a dusty outpost to a proper town as the railroad came through, bringing new opportunities and connections to the wider world. The Zachary Ranch, now spanning 200 acres with a respectable herd and reputation for quality, became known throughout the territory. Through it all, the bond between Jackson and Natalie deepened and strengthened. The passionate love of their early marriage matured into something even more profound: a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering commitment. They still found moments to be alone together, stealing away for rides across their land, or sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, watching the stars just as they had in the early days of their courtship. "Any regrets?" Jackson asked on the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, as they shared a rare bottle of champagne on that same porch. Natalie considered the question, looking out at the land that had become so much a part of her. In the distance, the lights of their ranch hands' quarters glowed warmly. Inside the house, their 4 children slept peacefully. "Not one," she answered honestly, "even getting shot. As terrible as that was, it led me to you, to all of this. How could I regret anything that brought us here?" Jackson took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he'd placed on her finger a decade earlier. "You know, most men spend their lives searching for treasure. I found mine the day I found you." Natalie leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him, the comfort of a love that had only grown with passing years. "You ever wonder about Caldwell?" she asked. Augustus Caldwell had been sentenced to 15 years in a territorial prison for fraud and attempted murder. He'd been released after serving 12, only to leave the territory, his power and influence permanently diminished. "Sometimes," Jackson admitted. "Not often. He's part of our story, but not part of our lives anymore." "Our story," Natalie repeated, smiling. "I like that." "And it's a good one, isn't it?" "The best," Jackson agreed, kissing her gently. "And we're still writing it every day." Inside the house, baby Grace began to cry, her voice carrying through the open window. Jackson and Natalie exchanged a look of shared understanding and rose together, hand in hand, to tend to their daughter. As they moved through their home, the home they had built together in every sense, Natalie felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. From the moment of desperate flight that had led to their meeting, through pain and healing, courtship and marriage, childbirth and child-rearing, success and occasional struggle, they had forged a life more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. In the nursery, Jackson lifted Grace from her cradle, expertly soothing the infant with a gentle bounce and soft words. Watching him, Natalie was struck anew by how completely this man had changed her life, not just by saving it on that fateful day, but by showing her what it meant to love and be loved, to belong, to build something lasting. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as Grace settled back to sleep against his shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," Natalie answered simply, "with exactly who I'm supposed to be with." Jackson's smile, warm and genuine in the soft lamplight, was all the confirmation she needed that he felt exactly the same way. As they tucked Grace back into her cradle, their hands brushed, a small contact that still sent a current of awareness between them even after a decade together. Their eyes met in the dim light, communicating without words all that they meant to each other, all that they had survived and built together. Outside, the vast Arizona night stretched over their land, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning now shining down on the life they'd created. From desperate strangers on a dusty road to partners in every sense of the word, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way, a love story written not in grand gestures but in daily choices, in persistence, in the quiet courage to build something lasting in a wild and unpredictable world. In the years that followed, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, Jackson and Natalie Zachary became pillars of the Sierra Vista community. Their story, how a brave woman who'd been shot while trying to escape captivity had been saved by a cowboy who got her to the doctor before she died, how they'd fallen in love and built a life together, became something of a local legend, a tale of courage, timing, and the unexpected ways that love can find us even in our darkest moments. But for Jackson and Natalie themselves, it was simply their life, ordinary in its daily rhythms but extraordinary in its depth. A shared journey that had begun with a desperate rescue and blossomed into a love that sustained them through all of life's challenges and joys. Neither could imagine a greater treasure than the family and legacy they had created together, born from that fateful moment when their paths had crossed on a dusty Arizona road.